Good afternoon, everybody. As you just heard, and anybody else who's just joining, we'll be recording this. If you don't want your voice or your face recorded, you can use the chat option in WebEx, so you can ask questions without anyone knowing what you sound like or what you look like. If you would rather not be part of the recording. I'm a developer advocate. Work with John in lots of opportunities around higher education. But I also work in startups, in hackathons, in meetups, and enterprise customers all over the shop, basically, doing developer enablement things. So helping developers get going. I use the IBM Cloud because we've got the ability to make it free, and we've got the ability, particularly for academia, to make it free and get extra bits as well. So if you're in the academic world and you want to try stuff out on the IBM Cloud, I'll be posting a link so you can sign up if you haven't got an account. And today, John asked me to do you kind of an overview and a bit of a deep dive into using our NodeRED tool, not IBM's NodeRED tool, but by developer advocacy. We use it all the time because it doesn't really rely on you knowing any particular language. You don't need to be particularly adept in JavaScript, even though it is based on Node.js. It's all flow-based programming. It runs on the cloud. It runs on mainframes. It runs on Raspberry Pis. It runs on your laptop. You can even run it on Android tablets if you wanted. So pretty much anywhere that you can run an operating system that's at least as powerful as Linux and beyond, then you can run this. You can't run it on things like an Arduino, unfortunately, but you can get it to most platforms. So there's any skill you pick up here, you'll be able to take anywhere you like, really. So I'll assume you know nothing. And I apologize if you spend a few minutes going, I know this stuff, but I'll dive into a little bit about getting it set up, and then I'll show you how you can do things. There's some material that I'll make available to John. He can pass around, and of course it'll be part of the video, but then we'll go into kind of interactive stuff. So if you would like to follow along, please do. I'll show you how to get into an IBM Cloud account, and you can set up your own instance to try this stuff. We'll be playing with basic API services, creating applications, building links to third-party services, and also to trying out some of the things that we offer in the cloud that are kind of consumable AI stuff. So the things you'll have heard, hopefully, from John about the Watson services for speech, for vision, for machine learning, for document discovery, all those kinds of things. So we'll put them all together into how you can use a NodeRED application to do that with very little, if in fact no programming at all. So let me do a screen share, and I will bring up a presentation that I have used in the past, but it has some relevant stuff. So a little while back, IBM launched the third Call for Code initiative. So it's just finished now. So all the information here is still usable, still relevant. You just can't participate in this year's competition. But you can see how it's all done. If you're interested in putting a team together to do something for next year, then all the material will help you do that. So that was based on creating a crisis chatbot that used NodeRED, the Watson services, running in the IBM Cloud, talking to some third-party and public APIs for data, and then being able to deploy and scale, and then also voice enabling it. So there's a whole load of material here for how you can extend things very rapidly and very easily with NodeRED as your kind of integration platform. I think of it as a kind of services choreography tool, if you like, as well. You can reach me independently if you want to get in touch. I'm ross@vnet.ibm.com. I do have a Twitter account, but I honestly don't tweet that much. Certainly don't use it as a communications vehicle. So the call for code stuff you can find in more detail. I won't spend too long on this, but the idea is that we'll do using technology for good. And this year there was a major focus on helping in the after effects of COVID-19 and the ongoing needs of people, not necessarily to cure, help to find cures for the disease, but to help people find ways to cope with the changes in society as they're being implemented. So there's lots of reference material in here. You can see this. We'll leave that up on the screen for a bit. I work in a group called the Developer Advocacy Team in the UK, and we have a GitHub repo where we do lots of sample workshops, tutorials, and you'll find there's a NodeRED starter workshop there as well, which takes you into different aspects of it. Pretty much all of our workshops have some aspect of the IBM Cloud and/or NodeRED to help you get going. We'll be referring to the how to create a NodeRED starter application, and there's also this material to how to voice enable things later as well. But I'll show you working first so you'll get an idea of how to do it. So COVID-19 we'll cover in very short scope. The starter kits, I'll show you where they are, so you can dig into those later. Have a quick look at the Watson services that we can pull into a NodeRED application, either in the cloud or on your laptop or on a Pi, just as easily. Oh, might have been faster than I was expecting. So what I would like to do is show you how you set it up and develop, and then what the common patterns are, so that you can say, all right, so if I wanted to do something like this with NodeRED, this is what it might look like. These are the components I would use to put them together. And then we'll do some worked examples. They won't necessarily be the chatbot, but we'll be pulling in chatbot services with Watson Assistant, Discovery, Voice. I show you doing a query out to some IoT stuff. That will be covered in the run through as well. If you find you've got particular interest that I'm not covering, shout out. Or if you think you'd like to know about that early on, just shout it out too. And if I'm going to cover it, I'll let you know. If I'm not, I'll see if we can incorporate it. I've got as much time this afternoon really as you would like, so I can keep going as long as John keeps the conference open. So what we're looking here is ways to handle the disease. That's the developer.ibm.com call for code subsite. Lots of the material I could show you about how to use NodeRED and all of the services that it incorporates. We have a kind of global site for developer enablement, and you'll find a broad portfolio of material that you can pick up and use for yourselves, for courses, for project work. If it's published there, you're free to use it, basically, regardless of whether you're in industry or in academia. So the starter kits that we provided in Call for Code give you problem statement, a lot of use cases, what a team might look like that puts something together. They'll show you the use cases for how it was done in the past, some nice diagrams that will help you fit it together. Some starter code, using a GitHub repo that you can clone or fork if you want to push stuff back into it, and then a whole load of reference material. And, in some cases, there will be some data sets, open source data sets that you can use that have been licensed to be incorporated in the starter kit so you can get going. So the one I will be referring to here is the chatbot for COVID-19, and the sample data is using the worldwide data set that's coming out of NIH. So those are the kind of 3 use case areas that we looked at for this. All of those use some kind of natural language interaction. They'll be looking for some kind of data retrieval, contextualization to make it appropriate for whoever the consumer of your application is at any given time. The theme for the call for code was around communicating information about the effects or collaboration with education, which you might find interesting here, and then using to build online communities that are appropriately geographically linked or linked by some other factor. So online communities, virtual and or physical. So all that you can go and harvest and do with as you like. So quick run through the Watson APIs and services that I'll be using. The idea with those services is that they're to get you going with AI, particularly in unstructured data and natural language, without having to understand necessarily how machine learning works, how deep learning works, but being able to benefit from them. So visual recognition is an image classifier. You take a picture, you send it to the service, and it'll tell you what it thinks of the content, and it'll tell you any of the previous classifications that it's been taught about and what level of confidence that it has in those. So you can use it as a way to just get some content information from images, but you can also train it yourself with images of your own. So you capture your images, create some training sets, and then you have your own classifier. So you can reduce the scope of what it is it needs to do, and then make it great for things like diagnostic tools. So you could use it for medical diagnostics, at least as a some kind of advisory capability. You can use it for accident damage. You can use it for inspection data to help figure out whether you need to have some kind of manual intervention or not. So you can train it with your own images, essentially. And the same kind of interface. Speech to text, that's speech to text, text to speech. It'll do transcription. It'll do voice synthesis from text. If you wanted to make an application that looks and feels like the Star Trek's onboard computer, you can talk to it and it'll talk back to you. Really easy to get going. And one of the options here I'll show you today is how to hook that in. Natural language classification lets you do natural language processing rather, because natural languaging is not really a word, but natural language classification, you can put things that people are saying or have written, and you'll get back some metadata about what it is they've said, what other categories, and it'll do an automatic kind of taxonomy generation from the content and point you to where you can get additional information that might help round out interpretation of the text that you're receiving. That's all kept in the cloud, nice and secure, and you can use it to bring in lots of different sources together. So it's also the underlying mechanism for some of the other services we offer, like personality insights. We've got translation, so you can create an application in your home language. Most of us in this kind of call will be doing it in English, but if you then wanted to enable it in Spanish, in Portuguese, in German, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, if you wanted to add on those capabilities, you don't have to go and add it into the application. You can just put some translation services on the front and back, and now you've got a voice-enabled multilingual version of the same thing. So you can have one piece of information that you keep central. You don't have to translate it directly, and you get some pretty good translations, particularly on the outbound side. Transcription depends obviously on language, use of language, accents, and so on. So you get some variability in that. But outbound, you can do really good translation, and we can do all that with NodeRED. So there's my 5-minute intro to nothing to do with NodeRED. Let's get you going. So what's NodeRED? If you've never seen it, you might be surprised about it. It's a visual programming tool that is not used for generating applications. You actually create applications with the visual programming tool itself. So it's not a thing that is used to then compile out to generate code. It actually is live code all the time. So every node that you drop onto the canvas is live code. And the idea of it being that the code modules that are part of the environment have been written and tested and beaten to death by the open source community. So there's a good chance that they are robust. They're not going to fall over. And when you stitch them together, what you do is you're configuring how the data flows between these pieces of code rather than writing any new code. So vast majority of what you do is configuration of data flows. You can do it in the cloud. I'll show you that in a sec. You can do it on your laptop. It's all open source, so you can get it from NodeRED.org. It was originally developed by IBM, and the major kind of committers and the architects, Nick O'Leary and Dave Conway-Jones, still work in IBM and are still the kind of major influences of it, but it's a much wider community now, and anybody can provide updates to the core, or they can add on new services, and you'll see there's a huge range of nodes and integration capabilities that have been added from the community. As simple as npm install. If you've got a Linux environment or something that will run the npm package manager for Node.js, it requires Node.js. I think the last version, the oldest version we're supporting now is Node.js 8. Earlier versions have been deprecated now. It's now a full-blown version 1 product. For the last 4 or 5 years, it was a kind of 0 point something. It's now a full-blown product. So you can run it with the knowledge that you'll get support from the community to help you get going. We have a starter kit that we built and have been running in what we originally had as Bluemix as our cloud platform. It stayed there all through the various generations and is now in the IBM Cloud catalog as an application starter kit. It deploys a tool chain. You configure your host name, how much memory you want it to use, and turn it on, and it goes live. It goes live as an empty application, but you then can add certain things straight into it, and it will be live. So there's a tutorial here that'll take you into more detail on it, but that's the basics of setting it up. But I'll show you it anyway, and then you can go back and reference it later. Which reminds me, if you want to do us creating an IBM Cloud account, if you don't have one, if you go to the link at the bottom of the screen here, the IBM Biz UCL NodeRED Starter. And I apologize if you're not from UCL. It still works. I wasn't aware that we'd gone into a wider audience until a few minutes ago. So the NodeRED Starter will give you a sign-up page to the cloud. Just all that does is give us a little bit of a tracking to see how people are hearing about the IBM Cloud. It's not tracking you particularly. You'll get a free account. You don't have to put in a credit card, any credit card information. And then if you're interested in adding on the extra bits from the academic programs that we run, you can apply for a feature code. I'm going to send you links for that. And the feature code will scale up your light account so you get more memory to play with. You can run more services. So let's show you one in action. If I go over to my cloud account, there we go. So when you log into, once you've signed up for an IBM Cloud account, if you follow that link, you'll be prompted for an email address. The email address comes to your inbox. It has a link to confirm that it really is you, and you've got your email accessible. You click on it, you get created with an IBM, what's called an IBM ID with access to the IBM Cloud. And you'll get a dashboard when you sign in. And you'll be asked about various GDPR type things on the way in the first time, and then after that, you'll be clear. You'll get dashboard. Dashboard will show you the things that you've got running, information about what you can do. The important bit here is that you've got catalog. So there'll be a catalog and then a resource list. The catalog is the things that you can do, things you can create, and you'll see we've got, look in software, you'll see there's all kinds of capabilities, computing, AI, databases, integration. You can do things with Kubernetes through Helm charts, cloud packs. You can do multi-cloud with Terraform. We've got options for Cube and OpenShift, also vCenter, so you can do things with VMware if you wanted to just do like image level conversions. But the interesting piece here is that you can go through the software catalog, just search for things like NodeRED. And you'll see there's a NodeRED app. You'll also see others where it thinks that Node might be interesting. So you'll see you can do raw Node.js applications. This is all running in Cloud Foundry. You can also elect to deploy into Kubernetes or OpenShift as well. The one I'll show you is Cloud Foundry based. You click on there, and the starter kit's going to set you up with an application definition. So there's a number of stages to go through. So I'll show you it, and then you'll get the idea of what's going on. We generate an application. That application has a tool chain which is used to build and then deploy the application through a pipeline, and then it goes live into the system. It's using a Cloudant NoSQL database, which is a kind of persistent data store outside of the runtime image. If you don't have that and you make any changes when you shut down your application, start to back up, everything will have gone back to what it was before. So you need some kind of persistent store across the use of these container-based services. So if we get started, put in an application, let's say I do this for 2020-08-06, put it to my default resource group. We're going to use Node.js because there's no option here. I'll put it into London. It tells me that I've got one light plan. This is for my Cloudant database. It's not obvious from that, but here I already have some Cloudant databases that I've done, and I'm just going to add another one here into my shared Cloudant. You just let it create one as your first one, and it will go through the process of creating one, which hopefully I can see. Oh, failed to create the app. Why did it fail to create the app? That's better. So, as always, with the joys of cloud platforms, lots of things happen in the background, and they're based on timings. You might get things that don't quite finish in time, so you'll get an error messages. That one was obviously waiting for a resource to tell it that it could go ahead. So here we are. We've got the definition of the application. It tells you lots of information about how you can handle it locally. If you want to create a local version, we'll just go straight with the cloud one first. You'll see it's already created a link from my Cloudant service. Nothing's going to happen here. Although we've defined the application, we have to deploy it now. And this is the bit that goes and generates a tool chain. We're going to go with Cloud Foundry. That's the only option for this one. It'll ask you for a Cloud API key, and you can just tell it you want to create a new one. It doesn't really matter. It just uses this key to allow the tool chain to have access to your service. So, and the tool chain runs within your account anyway. So it's just going to generate you a string that is the API key to use for this instance. When you first get your IBM Cloud account, you'll have a maximum of 256 meg of runtime memory you can allocate to an application. NodeRED needs just about 256 meg, so you can run one of those. So the way that you get around and get more value from it is by using the services to let the services do things for you. You can tweak it down if you want. You can reduce the level. You can pick, say, let's say 224, for example. It's a nice, slightly less than 256 meg. It'll still run. But I'm going to add some other services, which I know are going to make it go a little bit bigger. You leave it at the maximum. You'll get options for where you want to run your tool chain. So this is not where the application runs. This is where the tool chain runs. And it's going to pick up, because I have a number of accounts that I am connected to. I plug it to me. I'll put it into my academic initiative profile. Here's this will be my host name. So it should be unique. Well, it has to be unique for you to create one. If it's not, then you'll be prompted to pick up something else. So if I was to say, for example, no, I'm not even going to take that off because it might be that nobody has ever created an application called NodeRED, but I'll leave that as a host name. You would want yours to be unique. You can add your own domains, so you can create third-party domains, add them into your account, and then you can create aliases with your own DNS if you have it, and point it in. So you can then say, I would like to recognize forwarded requests that come here. But by default, you'll get either bluemix.net or CF, which is Cloud Foundry, appdomain.cloud as your application domain. If you're running off any of the university networks, then I would say stick with any domain that has mybluemix.net in it, because that seems to get through. If you switch to appdomain.cloud, sometimes the roaming profiles prevent you from getting out to it. It gets blocked by default on some of the networks. So stick with mybluemix.net. This then says where we're going to put it. We're going to put it into London. And here it goes now. This is the code generation that will create the NodeRED application itself, which is installing all of the NodeRED code. It brings up a runtime environment that has Node.js installed. It adds the Node modules that give you the editor, the tools, the default installation of all the Node modules, which are going to come with it. And it will then generate you a GitHub repository, a web IDE, so you can do editing online. You don't even have to have any code running locally if you don't want to. And then a delivery pipeline. And that delivery pipeline is the one that takes the code from the starter set and goes live. So if we have a look at the delivery pipeline, and we should see it go live. So this is now pushing code out. Hopefully it will have done a build. The build's passed. It's now doing this rolling deploy, and it takes 2 or 3 minutes to go live. There's a chunk where it installs support for DB2 that lets you access the free relational database platform in the cloud, and that can take a little bit of time because it has to do some actual compiling and building of the C code that stubs it in. And that may take 2 or 3 minutes. If you watch it, you can see it doing the link out with your the log's a little bit delayed, but it'll be using your authentication token with your API key. It'll log you in. It'll pull down the build pack that relates to Node.js, and then create it up. So somewhere under the covers, this is doing the same kind of thing as you would have to do if you were installing on your own laptop. You'd have to, but it's doing it from scratch. So it's installing Node.js from scratch, making sure it's got all of the updates for that. It's installing NPM. NPM is then pulling down the packages for NodeRED from the NPM repository. If you're not doing anything with Node.js and you're not JavaScript, don't worry, because after this there's very little JavaScript components that you're needed. Clearly, I'm sitting in a queue waiting for this to roll out. So what I'll do is I'll show you what it looks like when it goes live by going to the resource list. And I have look in my applications, in my Cloud Foundry applications, and I have one that I use quite a lot, which is Where is my Pi? And it was created so that I could track where my Raspberry Pi was whenever I fired it up off my phone. And what you'll see in here is things that you don't get to see on your own device, on your laptop or Raspberry Pi. It'll show you how much memory it's using. It'll show you what's in the runtime, that kind of thing. So this has 300 meg allocated to it, just because I've got some extra things. I've also connected some other services. So I've got my Cloud service, but I've also added Internet of Things, language translation, discovery, and a service called Twilio, which lets you generate and consume SMS messages easily. And the runtime will show you what's running, how much it's consuming, and some environment variables that you can pass in. You can also, if you want to, log into it, but we're not going to do that. And then you click on our URL and you'll get to your editor. And when you click on the NodeRED flow editor, you get this kind of thing. Only what you'll get is an empty one, which I think will have 2 bits of information in it, one of which says a string. This is basically NodeRED on the fly here. Hello world, which connects through to another node. We deploy this big red button here. It says we've changed the application somehow. New configuration's been done. There are little blue dots on the screen that will tell you which ones have changed since you last did the deployment. Deploy, and that's it live. So that's a live application. So this is just generating some debug. It's not doing anything clever, but that's a live application, and you can do exactly the same when you create one on a MacBook or with Windows or on a Raspberry Pi or on a mainframe, as it turns out, which surprised a lot of people. So let me get back to the deployment. And you'll see in the background, it did all this download of DB2 stuff, generated huge amounts of log entries, which is why it takes so long to catch up. Does a little bit of compile and bind, creates the container image, which goes into the repository and then is instantiated for you, and your application goes live. So I should be able to do the same thing here by going, instead of to my existing application, you'll see it's gone live. And the first time you go in, it'll ask you for a username and password. This is not your cloud account. This is an administration account for you to go in and edit. You create the password. Take passphrases. It doesn't have to have uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and so on. Just have it long enough. You can put spaces in if you wanted. Try and remember it, because as soon as you've used it, it's going to ask you to. As soon as you create it, it's going to ask you to use it again, and then it'll store it. If you forget it, you can override it by setting the environment variables, NodeRED username and password here. The great thing about doing this in the cloud is that you can then share these services with other members. If you're working on a project, you can share it with a team. You can pull in data that's being worked in the cloud through team services as well. There we go. So when I log in, there's our ready to go empty application. It's got nothing in it except this little hello world thing. And then over here, you'll see there's a thing for debug messages. If you click on this, any node that has this little button on the left-hand side of it that's clickable, you click it, it will trigger that node. Data will flow down the wire to the next node, and you'll see they get cascaded. We'll show that in a second. This node is a debug node, and it has the option to be on or off. So you can turn off and on debug wherever you need it in your flows. So if you've installed anywhere, you should end up with something that looks like this, in which case I can switch back over to presentation land, and I'll show you what's going on here. So we've got create wraps, they'll be with flows. How about I show you an application that actually is using NodeRED, and then you'll understand how what the fun of the flows are. So here's my integrated chatbot. And what I will do is just click up on a little demo version of where's my Pi? There's a demo. That demo goes into some online banking services. So you can generate HTML on the fly. I think the one that works is BankXN. for demo purposes. Yeah. So here I can click on the link, generate another link out, and create a link to go off to some maps. So using third-party services, doing some mapping, all of those are configurable with those flows. And we also have chat demo, so you can do a little bit of AI. You can create forms. This probably won't work. I'll try it anyway. This is almost certainly not going to work because I think my the particular Watson instance that it talks to has gone away, but I'll find you one that works. We can also do visual recognition. So we can choose a file, upload it, pass it to the classifier, and all of that's maintained in that flow editor. I go to my chat view. You can have lots of different little tabs for creating different workflows, keeping the work separate if you want to. We've got some, here's some AI. There's a chatbot. You'll see there's some patterns that are used here, which I'll show you. There's a web page that has a get. You go to the web page, it has some HTML. It returns an HTTP response. When you fill in the form, it comes into the post version of that. You process your data, go through some magical bits in here, and the response goes back out to say, what do you want to put in your results? Put it back on the main page, and then just sit in the loop with the form and then add some data to it. So I'm going to show you how that works, and I'll show you some of the patterns that you can use to make it all fit together. You get palette of nodes to get going. That's all of this stuff down the left-hand side here. You'll get common nodes. You'll get some functional nodes that you'll need to put things together, testing values, changing values, creating some text or reformatting some stuff without code if you don't need to do the coding parts, handling message rates, delaying things or rate limiting them, triggering on events. So you can have edge type triggering, links to serverless functions, some communications that are heavily embedded in NodeRED or MQTT, which is pervasive in IoT. I'll show you that working, and HTTP. So you can create yourself web services and also WebSockets. So I'll show you the mechanisms for using those. And then there's bits that you can add on, additional input and output. You can add cameras, you can add microphones, as long as someone's written a node for it and there's a way to make that work with either a browser interface or your local device. So if you have a Raspberry Pi and you have a Pi cam attached to it, you can import the camera feed into NodeRED, and then you've got basically an image source that you can pull straight into the application. Some other I/O things, so you can play audio, you can do IoT inbound and outbound. You've got some parsers for HTML you can use for screen scraping. It's not a generator, it's a parser of HTML, and that will use CSS to extract content from a document. You can do the same for XML, YAML. Lots of options that you can add on optionally to make it work, and then cover the dashboard stuff later. And then in the cloud version, you will always get the Watson components added, and that means you get access to the Watson conversation and assistant, which is used for building chatbots. Discovery, which does document processing. You can pass either a repository location and have it crawled for you, or you can load up individual documents and process them into a nice corpus that you can use for reference. You've got translation, natural language understanding, speech to text, they're all there. All right, switch over here. While I'm sitting at this point. Any questions so far? Anyone having a chat? Any questions? If you've got a question, just turn on your audio and let me know if you've got something going on. We've got a few folk on the line, so yeah, just ask a question if you want. I believe I've got my audio on. Yeah.
So I've got a question about the inject node.
Yeah.
Does it always have to have a trigger? And if it doesn't, does that mean it just automatically triggers?
So I will show you that. Good question. I will show you inject nodes. So the starter nodes that you always try and get something going with would be an inject node that just says I want to create an event. I don't have an external one to work with, or I want to simulate an external event. And you saw that you've got the options of creating text, creating numbers. If I switch back across to my empty one, when you pull in an inject node and drop it on the canvas, it defaults to a timestamp. You can also then create strings, numbers. You can generate some JSON. You can create JSON expressions with JSON Alta. You can pull in global variables that you've established somewhere else and are sharing across the various flows. But yeah, you can put in whatever you want, create some text. It defaults to not doing any repeats, but inside the inject node is actually a cron tab mechanism. So you can say, I want to do this on intervals, or a bounded interval range. So I want to do it between 8 in the morning and 5 at night, for example, or I can do it at a specific time. And the one that's used quite often is I want to do it just at the beginning, unless someone clicks the button. So whenever we start up, run this as well. So you have a kind of startup initiation process. So you've got a fair amount of flexibility in when you can trigger the event in the inject node. It's used mostly for manual intervention or for having some kind of timer. A handy one that I use it for is if you have to have an authorization token that you have to keep refreshing. If you're going to be using it and you're using it kind of infrequently, but it only lasts for a couple of hours, then you can trigger every 1 hour, 55 minutes to go and get and store a current token. So yeah, lots of flexibility on when you can use those. So the palettes, you drag them on, you bring the nodes onto the palette, you hook them up by just dragging the wiring across. You can have multiple inputs to a node, but there's no implicit combination of those inputs. They're just sequenced. Right? So when the data, if you've got 3 nodes that feed into another node, for example, if I was to take this and put it to here, there is no implicit logical combination of these two that makes any sense. They're just independent event streams that happen to arrive at this node at different times. If you want to build in some kind of logical combination of events, then you do it within that node or you do it downstream. Similarly, you can have any output point can go to multiple nodes, and each time you do that, you create another kind of event stream that runs. Because it's running in Node.js, it looks like it's running in parallel. So you can do lots of independent I/O events in different streams. Bringing things back together can be a little bit more complicated. And that's why we've got some split and join functions down here where you want to split things up, process them perhaps differently, and then have them come back together. The split and join nodes let you put sequences back together, even though the sequence may have been processed differently. Some nodes you can have multiple outputs, so particularly things like a test node, a switch node. If you create a switch node that says you want to test the value of a node, if I drop it on there, you'll see when you add nodes in, you can have them automatically splice themselves into a flow. So let's say here we're looking, you test the values. This is like a case statement or a select statement, depending which languages you're familiar with. So you test a particular property of the message as it flows through, and you can do a bunch of range tests. So let's say that it is greater than a particular number, let's sort of greater than 6. You can then add in other conditions and say otherwise, one of them being otherwise, but you can also do other ranges as well. But let's say otherwise. So if it's bigger than 6, do something, output it through this exit. Otherwise, put it out through this exit. And that actually now shows up as, in the switch, 2 exit points. So this flow will only ever pass messages across if there is a value that's higher than 6. And for a timestamp, that will be higher than 6. But you can also feed in data from other nodes. And here we can have another one where we're just going to say it's a number. And just for completeness, we'll say it's 3. And then if I put a debug node over here and attach it and deploy that, I can show you a little thing about what the debug nodes look like. So when I hit this button, that's the node, that's the number of the timestamp epoch time. You'll see when I've got my cursor on that number here, on that individual debug message, there's a debug node that has an orange dotted line around it. That's telling me which debug node is producing the debug message. If I put it over here, you'll see that's coming from the other one. And that message can only be lighting up that debug if it came out the top of the switch. If I press a different button, and look at 3, you'll see that 3 is coming from the bottom output from the switch. So nothing happens in the top bit because it's not greater than 6. So this flow never activates, but this one activates in the right conditions, and then the message will flow along. So you can make assumptions about the data if it's on this flow because it came through a test earlier on to get you going. Saw a message pop up in the chat. Yes, there is a microphone node service. Oh, right. Ooh, getting lots of questions now. I need to call a microphone node. What you can do, I'll get to it in a second, but I'll show you microphones. It's not installed here, so I'll show you in the adding new things to NodeRED section. I'll show you adding a microphone. If you bear with me a second on that, Natalia. If you're using a node that requires socks on Windows, you need to set up the path here. Okay. Thank you, Joshua. I don't know what socks on Windows is, but yeah, you need to. Your path variable should be set on your environment, but you've no guarantee it's going to be the same. So some audio, so you can't use the audio, native audio in the cloud, but you can use browser-based audio. So you can use the get user media components and use a browser as the way to capture audio and then feed it in. So I'll show you that working as well. So lots of things you can connect up, connect them to each other. You use the palette. What I didn't show you there was the documentation. I'll hide this away. The documentation, if I click on a node here, over this side of the little book, it will tell you how the switch works, what the values are that you should be passing in, what it's expecting on its input nodes, what this data should have in it, or what it's going to try and at least test on, how the rules work in the switching, and what the output looks like when you put it back together again. So it'll tell you that, and most nodes will tell you that. So, and as you click on them, you'll see the information changes to reflect what you're looking at. And it will also change. So if you've got a node here, you can hover over it. It'll give you a little bit more information about it. You drag it onto the palette, you'll get all the information about how you build this particular node into the flows that you're working with. We'll come back to that one in a minute. So I've shown you the drag and drop. Once you've got it, it works pretty brilliantly, I have to say. And to connect things to each other, you click and hold, drag out a connector, drop it onto another connector. When you want to get rid of it, highlight it, just click and leave it, and then hit the delete button, and it's gone. If you remove a node from within a flow, even though you've added it in and it automatically spliced it in, if you take it out, it removes all the connections. So you then have to put it back in again or reconnect anything that you want connected, and that's gone. Because it's a live editor, you can also put things back again by just hitting undo in whatever your browser is. On my Mac, it's Control Z. On a Windows machine, it might be Command C, something like that. So, running a flow, you hit deploy when it's when you've made your changes, and say there's a little blue dot say things have changed in this particular node since you last deployed, and this big red button shows up in the top to tell you that you've got to deploy. You have options in the deployment to say just restart the whole thing, redeploy all the flows, start again. If you've got some initialization code, you might not want to do that every time. So you can do just the modified flows, or you can do just modified nodes. That's used a lot of self-fun because you get some weird things happen in your flow that you can't really predict what will happen. But using usually just modified flows, it means the whole page of flows on a page. And we'll deploy those. So it's much faster than restarting everything from scratch. When you're doing workshops, you'll find that you'll be asked to import stuff into the flow editor. That means you don't have to build everything from scratch. And if you go to the NodeRED website itself, which you can get to from the NodeRED menu, if you go to the website, you can do a search for flows, besides all the documentation that's here to tell you how to get going. In the flows, you can search for examples of, well, let's see if there's speech. There's this bunch of speech examples. You'll see there are nodes, and these are nodes that will handle speech, but there are also flows. And the flows, well, no, turn it the other way around. It's a negative selection. So the green ones will show you how to put together a flow. So here's a Watson speech to text using WebSockets. If you look at that, what you get is a load of JSON. What you can do is copy this, go to your NodeRED application, and then do an import. And you can import from a file, or you can import directly from an export file and import. And actually, what you'll get is all the nodes and the flows, the connections that you need to make this work. So I'm going to put that there and then hit, let's see, and make it go away again. So you can do import, but you can also say select the whole flow and export. And you can export just the node you've selected, the whole flow, which is the current page, or all the flows. So you can take your whole application and export it or download it, and it's just a JSON file. So there'll be virtually no code in it unless you've created a function node that has a little bit of JavaScript in it. It's all just configuration data, really. And then you can import it into other versions. So if you wanted to create one and then deploy out to clones, like if you were running a network of IoT devices, for example, you could push it out to lots of Raspberry Pis. They would all load up with the same flow and interpret locally. All right. So where are we now? So import and export. If you've got any security attributes like passwords that you've had to put in for configurations, those are not saved in that flow. They're saved in a separate file for credentials. So there's no straightforward export of the security information. You have to make that go through a separate channel. All right. So I've shown you the idea of this. So the thing that's moving around between those nodes along the wires, if you like, is a JavaScript, is a JSON object that you access directly through the JavaScript JSON APIs. So you will normally find that nodes work with the message.payload property, but they'll tell you if they're also going to use other properties. So they'll look for the topic. They might look for results, so they'll create results in a message.results property. They might look for a URL property, which would be how you could configure it to go and make calls to third parties. And you'll see if you get a request that comes in to an HTTP node, since NodeRED is built on the editor itself is built using the Node.js middleware. It's got the Express engine built into it, which means it's a web server as well. So you can have your own HTTP services, and that allows you to interrogate all the properties in the incoming request through a message.rec property as well. Configuration of the nodes, you'll see, is just menus. By and large, you fill in a form to say what you want this one to do. So if I wanted to do something with my cloud and database, here's a cloud and database. So these are great because they're NoSQL. You don't have to have created a schema to do this. I just want to take this data from my timestamp. Let's take this one out. I'm just going to create a database that has numbers in it. You'll see it's already got a service instance, and that's the database that NodeRED itself is using for storing stuff. But I can add in my own little bucket here to store things in. So I call it the demo bucket. I want to insert. You can also remove things if you know what the key is. But what I want to do is insert some data. I'm only going to put the object payload in. And you'll see this has gone red again up at the top. I click deploy. It's now live. And I can generate messages and send them into the database. Not particularly useful unless you want to go and get them back out at some other point. So we want to configure it again. You'll see there's the database is up and running. I want to get it back out of demo. Let's get all the documents because that's the easy way to do it. I take my inject node, which is really just being used to trigger the read. Drop in my debug node and deploy. Hit the bin to clear out the debug. Click my input to trigger, and what I get back, you'll see in that little orange dotted line on the message payload, is the current list of objects that are in the database. And it's come back and been parsed as a JSON array. And in here I've got 5 entries, and you'll see the IDs are all different, although the payloads are the same because I was only sending 3s. These are 5 different instances of the same data, or just 5 records. They don't come back in any particular order. If you want to sort them, you have to create your own kind of sort indexing function. But you can now parse these. If you wanted to make them more than just a simple piece of data, if you wanted to put it into a JSON object, you can do that by creating JSON. And so the schema here that's an implicit by being just a number, I can change immediately by going into this payload and saying what I actually want to do is generate some data. Oh, let's see, data, why not? Some constant data. We'll call it Fred. And maybe we'll give it some kind of value. Mix some types together, and we'll call it, we've got 17. So that's my new data object that I'm going to transmit to the database. If I put it in the right place, of course. That's not where I wanted it to be. I need a timestamp. in there, because that's just for triggering. What I want to do is inject a different one into there. Little JSON object. Put that in there. It's now done. I hit deploy again. Do that a couple of times. Now when I pull my objects back out, you'll see I've now got a mix of just the single payload and then this structured payload as well. So schemaless data, you can retrieve them just as all as different independent JSON objects. And I see a question in the chat there. All right, thanks. Thank you, Joshua. All right, that's audio stuff. So what we'll get to in a minute or two for the other stuff. So you get these bound services. When they're bound, they have some of the nodes are intelligent enough to look for these bound services, like the connection credentials. But by and large, you'll be configuring things like endpoint, username, password, or API tokens if you want to use third-party services. Okay, so for completeness, here's the information about timestamps and creating those triggers. So say we've done this. All of this is happening inside the development environment, which you don't really want to give to users to work with. You want them to be interacting through something else. So what we'll do is set up a little web page that takes a hello world, and when you invoke it, it creates an HTTP endpoint. So I throw that one away. So we're back in here. Here's my my hello world. Just create a new flow. If I put in a template here that is my hello world message, I can cause that to be triggered. It'll form some output. There's my debug, and I can deploy it. I hide that away. I do that, you get hello world, because that's what I've said to do with the message. If I want to make this accessible from the outside world, I could click this same thing here and say I would like to have an HTTP input point, an end point that says if someone comes to this URL, I will send back whatever the magic happens in the middle to them. So let's go to here and say hello. Now I've got a /hello path into my application. You always have to have at some point a response message. Otherwise your browser or whatever is invoking you as an HTTP request won't get an answer. So you have to have an HTTP response. And what I'll do is I'll just tag it, the debug message on here, and we can see what's coming in when you send in a request. So this HTTP response, by and large, you don't need to do a lot of configuration unless you want to change things or you want to mess around with headers for cross-site scripting or changing the output formats, things like that. Largely, you just plunk one on the end. And if we now deploy that, so this works, it's still not doing anything else, but you'll see this no response object is coming from the HTTP because it doesn't know how to respond to anybody because nobody's asked it for anything from the outside world. So if we go to our application, which is up there on the top, that's our live application. And I will create another tab and we'll just say, hello. No big surprise, it says hello world for you. But it's coming in through that node, through here, getting the hello world from there, and then sending it back out through that route. And this is the request that came in. We didn't put any payload in. Here's all the request information. So this is all the stuff you get to know about if you create an HTTP in. It'll tell you where it's coming from, the IP address, what headers were set, what the browser, or the user agent string anyway, what the browser might be that you're getting it from, where it originated, what the host name was that was used. So you can tell if you're using multiple sites or different aliases to get things in. You get your cookies, all kinds of stuff. So lots of information that you might be using to control how the flow works through the rest of your application. Since it's HTML, HTTP, you can add in parameters. So let's do our query equals Windows, for example. It doesn't really matter what it is. I haven't changed anything about how the output comes out, but I will have it now appeared in the payload as the query parameter. So now I can pass parameters in as well. And you can then build templated versions of these inputs to automatically parse out parameters as well. And you'll see if we look in the help for this one, it tells you how to do it. You can put in these placeholders so you can create named properties within the URL itself. So you can build RESTful APIs really easily. So switch back again. So you've got your hello world, simple web server. If you wanted to do a little more, so there's a little more magic happens in the middle here. We've got an option here to just add in something that modifies the data. This one's generating a random number and adding it on. I can actually just tack on the query parameter. So if I took the query, and here's my template, I know from the debug that payload.query is a parameter that can be passed in here. So I can now use this templating language and say, show me payload.query and add it in if there is one. If there isn't one, you get null. If there is one, it'll put the value in. So now I can do the same thing and hopefully it adds it in. So you can use the templating tool to access the properties that are available through the object or any of the other properties that you might want to use. So you can use that to dynamically create pages. Or if you're not creating a page, you might just be creating an HTTP responder. You can use it to return the data that you want into an API request. And there's another property you can put in, the user agent string. You'll see that that's a different property again, based on the rec information. So there's rec.headers, user agent. We can add that on underneath. Let's put in a horizontal line, and then underneath we'll put in rec.headers.user-agent. So whatever it is, it'll stick it into the bottom. Now when I do the deployment, now I've got all the information about my browser string. So nice and easy to do. You don't have to do any programming other than be able to navigate through the object structures and then a little bit of HTML. So most people that are tackling web applications are going to know a bit of HTML, a bit of CSS. If you need to do things that nodes can't do, if you can't combine switching and changing values or templating, you can then use function nodes, and function nodes let you create raw JavaScript. You can choose to generate multiple outputs if you want. It's full JavaScript support, but it runs in a little sandbox environment to protect the rest of the runtime if you mess up. So you'll find it's a little bit slower to do things, but it will let you do functions that are not available. You can use some services for adding your own debug information, sending it to the console, sending it to the node debug window, and so down the right-hand side. So you can create your own functions as well. You might want to bring in third-party services, which you want to bring in, and not everything that you would normally get in Node.js is exposed to you, because we're not always sure which environment is being run. So you choose when you're running this as to which external services you want to make available, and then you can add them in. All of this information you can find and play with at the NodeRED.org documentation about using function nodes. The current trend is to avoid them if at all possible by using combinations of the switch and change nodes and the JSON-ATA functions, which are pretty robust for handling arrays and strings and merging data sets around, but they all run within the environment that your messages are running in, not in the sandbox environment that the function nodes run in. So web form, what we did just now was just an API request, which is here's an endpoint, call it, get a response. If that response is a form or an actual interactive web page, you'll get this pattern that comes back out, which is a looping form that says, what's the current set of results from the last time I was run, and what are the new things you would like to tell me about. So you might have it as data entry, you might have it as a ticker that's running, showing current information, plus allowing someone to interact with it as well. So the one that it keeps coming up with chatbots, where you've got an input form, and what you see is the history of the chat, maybe links to other services. If I show you an application like this, not my Raspberry Pi one, there's an integrated chatbot here. The flow, although there's a load of extra stuff going on down in the bottom here, we've got, here's a chat, there's a template node for the chat, and you'll see it has an action. It's going to post it back to where it got a request from, really, and some extra bits here to allow us to put some data in an encapsulated form, an input field, and then this results from essentially previous results. And that comes in from a link node from lots of different places. So the results can be generated from different parts in the flow as we go. This one goes through the form. The input comes back into the form to here. We then figure out whether we need to do some clever stuff at the beginning of it, and then send the request off to a chatbot back end, which will then go and do the natural language processing. And if there's a command being recognized in what you're asking the thing to do, it'll go off and execute the command, generate the output, and then send it back to this common results view. So this is called chat. So I can do things, I think, like, no, this is not the, how do I change a headlamp? We won't know how to do that, but I can ask it, what can it do? And like all great chatbots, it should at least tell you what it can do. And this one's come up with no answer. So how about you tell me about margin calls? Let's type that. So this has gone off. It's not found any commands to run, but it has discovered that there's some information that it can find in its little corpus of a discovery database and sends back that kind of format. I can also ask it about current customers. And depending on how this has been set up, this will go off and do a database lookup. And let's do active customers. So all the while, this is going around in a little loop, pulling information from places and then representing it back into the same form. And that's a kind of common style for processing. So if we come back in here, you'll see do the get, post back to the same form name or another one. You can always override it by specifying a different name in the form definition. Do some magical stuff in the middle to to generate your responses, have the side effects that you want, do the lookups, generate your response, and carry on the next one. But this kind of get post loop with the same path is very common, and you can implement it really straightforwardly. An API proxy is essentially just another web API, which instead of you generating data from your own repositories, you might go off to a third party, collect some data, or merge it with data that you've already got. So making some third-party calls or calling out to another service that you maintain, wrap up the data in a format that is appropriate to the request that came in, and generate response. So you turn yourself into a web request. So that uses this HTTP request node. Where are we? HTTP request. We go over here, you'll see there's an HTTP request. So this is for making calls to pretty much any other arbitrary URL. So we can say we're going to just make a request. We'll get, let's say we wanted to go to https://google.com just to get a page. And we're not going to use any authentication. We'll just let it run as it is. What I should get back is the HTTP response and ideally HTML. And if we open that up and get the whole thing, clear out the debug, redeploy, this goes to google.com and brings back what would be sent to a browser, which you can then pass through an HTML parser and pull out information. So that's in this case, it's just a web page, but it could also be an API. And the API example we've got in here is an API for COVID-19 current data. You put that in and it'll send you back the data for UK countries that are registered in the COVID data reporting. So really simple. You get the data back. You can format it as, you interpret the format either as JSON or text or a buffer or HTML and process appropriately. Nice and simple to build these things all together. Another one that comes up a lot is WebSockets. So not only do you have your form, but you also have data that's arriving at the form without you having to keep filling in the data or refreshing. And the simple mechanism here just does, here's your endpoint. It creates a web page. There's a little bit of JavaScript in a head script to set up the WebSocket connection. And then inside NodeRED, you have the ability to generate data to and from WebSockets. So this one is sitting waiting for messages to come in and then republishing them, or it will have a timer using the timestamp cron effect to generate data on the fly. So if I switch over to this one, where's my if I get back to my WebSockets demo, if I can find it. Webhooks, there's lots of WebSockets. There we go. You'll see if I go to /simple, then I will get a simple web page that just has a WebSocket connection. It'll have some messages that when you click, it'll submit a message, and then otherwise it'll just have whatever the previous WebSocket data was. If I go to here, leave that page. So I have a web page which, without me touching anything, should tick over every 5 seconds or so with a new timestamp on it. There we go. That one just changed up there. That's changing as we do it without me touching anything. So there's a nice WebSocket feed coming in. I can also click the button, and that message click is not coming from me clicking it, it's coming back from the response from the WebSocket. So I can feed data into the web page rapidly with WebSockets. I can also transmit data out using WebSockets as well. So you can make a true kind of live data feed. On the lines of live data feeds, I'll show you how to add in some extra capability. So if the thing you're looking for isn't in the palette that you've got, you can go and manage the palette and add some more. You can also add them in by changing the package.json file, which is the standard mechanism for Node apps. If you've got the live running version, some nodes are not possible to install just because of the way the build process works. But by and large, a NodeRED application, you can at least try this. Let's go to the palette. This shows you all the nodes that are currently installed. And then in the install tab, you can search for the 2,700 modules that are available. What I mean by it being quite a large community maintained project, there are loads of nodes for all kinds of things. What I want to show you is a dashboard node, because another common thing for projects is to just create a little dashboard with dials and widgets and so on. Maybe a little tick graph to show you the things that are going along. You'll see here there's a NodeRED dashboard node. If we install that, this will try and do a live install. I have to tell you, sometimes when you do this, if you've got a number of other things installed, the build process can fail if you're running in the cloud, because it uses a chunk of extra memory to run the installation process, and it can sometimes throw you over the edge. But with the 256 meg on IBM Cloud, it's usually enough to get it going. So now, down the side here, we will have not only all the Watson nodes, but we'll now have these dashboard nodes, which give us the ability to create charts and gauges, some templated stuff, some audio output as well, and also some gadgets, widgets that you can use to create a very simple UI. And if I got one handy, there's my simple UI. We'll get back to the thing here. So use Manage Palette to try it. The dashboard nodes have two types, input widgets and kind of output widgets, really. So with this little flow of just two nodes, really, in a debug, we can create this interactive slider component. So I switch over to my node, and let's pick a slider, put it up at the top, move all these things down a bit. Here's my slider, and I'll put it onto a gauge, connect up. So with this slider, it's not configured yet, so I want to create a default group to add to, and it needs to be on a tab. So once you've done one of these, I'll just put it onto my home dashboard. I'm only going to use the one for this. I'll add that. Set the range 1 to 10, or it could be any range you like, basically. On the gauge, I'm going to do the same thing. I'll set its default as range 0 to 10, and then it's got this gradient that will change as you move change the value. It's got some defaults. It's going to go on the same home page. If I deploy that, one of the options we've now got is a dashboard, and I can link out to it from here. And there's my gauge, that's default stuff, and now I've got a slider. So I can have interactive control, moving things around without me having doing any programming at all. Kind of useless unless I'm also doing something with that data. So I can now take that data, I can feed it into my debug to show me that I can actually use it inside the application. Do deploy. And now if I put my debug back on, when I move the slider, look back in the application, I've got some information that came as I was doing the sliding. So it'll be generating events as it goes from one discrete value to the next. So I can now react on this flow as the slider moves. So I've now got an interactive control inside the application with no programming, basically. So hopefully enough to get you going to show you that you can have web pages, you can create interactive gadgets and put them on the web pages. All the information about NodeRED itself is available at nodered.org. Lots of docs that are improving all the time with how you can install it, how you can use it, how you can use the editor, how you can take the editor out and just use it as an embedded application. Because really you don't want to go into production with an editor built into the tool. And there are lots of variants for doing it. You can actually deploy it as a container that becomes an immutable version of the tool. Bits and pieces that are slightly different between the cloud and a standard install. The main installation, you'll go into a file that holds your flow.json, and Cloud Foundry, in the cloud version, it'll be stored in a database. And in this particular case, we use Cloudance, but you might find other instances that use something like MongoDB. There are a bunch of nodes that are installed in the cloud by default. They are mostly to do with the Watson services. And then there are some other capabilities that have been turned off to limit you. So you can't go and mess around with the underlying operating system unless you go back and consciously re-enable it. So the crisis chatbot shows you all kinds of stuff about how to build it. What I'm going to do now is switch over really to kind of lots of different bits and pieces that you can do for the integration and show you how they work. I'd like to show you a bit of Internet of Things. So UCL, I know, has been doing some things with IoT, so does Sheffield. Show you the mechanisms that are available off the shelf to integrate IoT data, and some of the services that you will be able to use to try and do some experimentation as well. Got any questions at this point? Oops. Anybody there? Fine.
I'm here, Ross.
You're there, John. Thank you.
Great so far, Ross. Looks amazing.
So what you've seen is it's a little, I have to admit, it's a little dry, but you've got all the basic mechanisms for this. There are a bunch of interfaces that are useful to get going, but there are a bunch of apps that I've built using NodeRED, just using lots of the template type code. I'm going to show you one. I'll have to start it up because it doesn't usually hang around because it uses low memory. I'll start this one up. It's actually a company research tool which goes off to company's house. It pulls in data from the company's house API, creates a little responsive front end for it. So if we have a quick look, I don't remember the last time I started this. Let's see if it goes. Yeah, it's still alive. So if I go to demo, not live yet. Not quite started. Demo should be working now. Oh, there we go. That's why. Yeah. So when you add things with the add to palette or manage palette option, it loads those extra bits after it's come up. So it'll fire itself up and then go, oh, there's a load of extra nodes that have been added through the manage palette mechanism. I'll just go and add those later. So it stalls loading the actual application. But anyway, what we've got here is a get and a put type loop as it goes through doing a bunch of interactions. So if I go to the demo view, so this is also NodeRED. I can have a view of my clients. It'll generate stuff on the fly from database retrievals. We can bring up interactive links, discover things in the news. It'll go off and do a query for this particular client. It'll go and do a search in the visual discovery tool to see if it can find anything about, in this case, BP. And it'll generate a kind of visualization on the fly across news articles that relate to BP. It does take a little while for it to do it, unfortunately, because this is a kind of experimental free demo. It doesn't get a lot of resources on our cloud because it's free and cheap. Oh, Josh was saying he's got his microphone off. Okay. No, this one's actually taking just a bit too long. So if I just say BP instead, that might help. Now this goes to Watson Discovery News, which is another service that you could get for free. It's always got the news service available to you, so you can find news articles in relatively recent times. This then does natural language processing and pulls up things about the network of articles that are connected, the concepts that are being talked about, people, places, things like that, and then allows you to drill into those. So if I wanted to look into carbon, it'll show me all the articles that are related to carbon. It'll let me pull up the article on the side and give me information down here. So all kind of ready to go within the application. So all of this is being generated on the fly using NodeRED. We've got a news feed coming in from the BBC that uses the BBC RSS news feed, parses that, and then gives me links to real-time BBC News. We can go in and create ourselves a settings tool, which will let us link out to a database to store preferences. I can search for new companies. I wonder if UCL's in there. I've never tried that. Let's do a search for UCL as a company. UCL Limited. So I'm guessing that's not the same. How about UCL Developments? That might be. Like this is all coming directly out of Companies House data. You can also do the same thing against the Edgar database in the US. Same sort of information. I can add them into my thing. I can check in the news. I can look for the officers that are attached to it. Don't think this is the same UCL. Some New Inc. Corporation. So this one was only recently set up. So a lot of information I can search for by pulling in from different repositories. So that's all NodeRED. And then we have another one which I'm building at the moment, which is an integrated chatbot. There was a query about using microphones. You can turn on microphones by using the browser capability. And let's see if I've got one that does that, but you can add in from the browser in your application. If you've got one that you've just set up, you can use a function here called browser utilities. Contrib browser utilities, utils. And if you link out to it, it'll tell you what it has. It has a camera, it has a microphone, and you can upload files. So if you wanted to do a quick test with microphones, you can install the browser utils. It'll download that and install it into the runtime, and you'll have a camera capability as well. So it'll take pictures with your laptop camera So we could, hopefully there'll be a little node added at the bottom now. Oh, it's been added in somewhere else. There we go. There's the microphone. So the microphone is just a microphone. It's part of the browser. And what we want to do is capture what comes in, but we'd also want to ideally take the speech and convert it to text. So what you might want to do is grab a speech to text node, drop it in here, connect it up, and then we would get the output from the speech to text node. Let's have a look. I'm pretty sure if we look at speech to text, it's going to say it returns the results, not in the payload. So yeah, the result, the returned output audio is in the message.transcription field, not the message.payload. So payload will be untouched. It'll still be the audio stream, but the transcription will be there on the side. Now, this needs an API key and a service endpoint. So you would have to have a speech to text service. I already have one. Over here, go to my resource list. I look for speech. In my services, I have a speech to text. And what you'll see in here is it has an API key. And the API key, I won't show you because this is going on video, but you can copy it into your NodeRED. There's my API key. I'll paste it in there. This service endpoint is the same as the default, so I don't need to change that. I want to use English to get me going, but you see these are the various transcription options you've got. So it knows how to transcribe from these languages in kind of conversational use. Broadband model would let it default into, and then it's going to look for, you can have speaker labels and it'll try and distinguish voices. It shouldn't really matter because it's only me talking here. Let's at least give it a go and we'll see what comes out of it. So keeping in mind, so far, no coding to make this work. I'll go back to a debug view, clear my debug. All right. So now if I click this, it should prompt me for the ability to use the microphone in the browser because it's going to get user media to do that. So hopefully, don't tell me I've got it turned off on this browser setting. Yeah, it's not doing it because I'm not secure. So if I do this, I'll just, this is the thing about the get user media, you have to be doing it on secure sites, and by default, this is launched into a non-secure version. So I'll go back in here. Let's save the password this time. Now, if I do it, it should pop me up with a microphone. Then we allow the microphone. And now it's recording. And it will record all the things I say until I press the stop again. Now it sends it off. And here is the response that comes back from the event. And I've got a load of stuff in here that is, the arguments are wrong and stuff. So I'm going to have to tweak this. Bad arguments. Must have some things turned on here. So obviously that's not quite ready to go. And I suspect what I need to do is change it so that it's using, let's try narrowband. And I think everything else is all right. We don't need anything there. Do narrowband. Place the output. Oh, we can choose to put it in payload. We don't need to do that. We'll turn off the audio format pre-check. We're not in streaming mode. We want to do capture and then record. Oh, sorry, record and then pass through. Now and again, I have to admit, I did not try this earlier on. Now and again, these nodes get slightly out of date, and I wonder is whether this has got outdated since the last time I used it. It may need an update, but turn it on and get a recording coming from the microphone. Does a transcription. Oh, this is terrific. Just getting nothing coming through from that. It must not be empty or narrowband models. This is a good demo. My apologies for that. I think my instance of the speech-to-text service needs to be refreshed. There is another way of doing this now, which is if I go to in here, there's some sample stuff you can get from the Watson SDK team, and I'll send a link for it, which actually has some samples for doing transcription. It uses the Watson speech service, and this one I know works, at least it did yesterday. Which clicks this one up. And I can start my microphone transcription by turning that on. It'll do transcription, and it's passing it off to a chatbot all the time. So as long as I keep talking, it'll try and figure it out. So if I was to say to it, show me current customers, show current customers. Current customers. Trades for IBM. So it's going into the voice transcription service, passing that through. That's using a streaming socket to get the information backwards and forwards. And that feed is coming through using the WebSockets to update the web page. So let's go back to your. Any more in the chat? All right, so question of Microsoft. What if we're making things for NodeRED? Okay, so Josh, I had a question here about making things for NodeRED. So if you want to create your own nodes, there is a lot of documentation at nodered.org. You go to nodered.org. In the documentation, you will find some tutorials about creating nodes. So how do you create and extend NodeRED? So there's a template style that you need to follow to create the configuration pages, and then there's a JavaScript file, which is how does the runtime work, and then how does the configuration setup work. There are loads of samples, and if you look at the nodes in the flows page, which of course is flows and nodes, if you look at any of those nodes, so let's check out this one, chunk to lines. The chunk to lines link, you can go to GitHub and you'll see how they built one. So there'll be a package.json that says what are the dependencies that it needs. So this one doesn't have any real dependencies. It's all built, all self-contained. So there's a package.json file. There's the template HTML, which is the form that you use to configure it. And it shows you how to set that up. So you can use existing examples, clone those, and then modify as you need. And you can also, of course, take the core from NodeRED itself and do a fork and provide updates, because the team's always looking for appropriately tested updates to the core if there's issues found. So there's everybody's welcome to create them. You can then publish them and have them incorporated into the kind of NodeRED catalog, if you like, by cataloging them through the NodeRED itself. And then people can install them through the palette manager. I'd like to have a button I can press and then call the microphone service. Right, so there are mechanisms for you to do that. Our buddy Sean, who works in the same group as me, has been building get user media based services in github.com/IBM developer. You'll find, if you look for NodeRED, in the NodeRED Watson 101, Sean has gone through the process of creating, I think this is a camera one. So he shows how to use web components to add a camera, and that actually will do it for you. You can add an application in directly. You can also generate raw get user media JavaScript instructions, in which case you just have to put it onto the web page, let the browser handle the capturing of the microphone and the audio, and then it streams into your application, and you go from there. You just have to write the kind of the socket streaming handler that you're going to have to capture and then feed it into your application. But that all happens in the browser side. To get it into your application, you then have to have a mechanism to pass the data back into the application. The sample there with the microphone, that was using that uses NodeRED itself as the mechanism for launching the get user media mode media capture. Before I forget, let me show you IoT. I think we're coming up on 3:30. I will carry on as long as someone's there and they're asking questions or are interested. I'll keep going, but I'm try and wind down for 3:30. Let you guys get your afternoon, but I'll show you IoT stuff. NodeRED originally started as a kind of event integration tool. So it was based around MQTT and some early kind of IoT-based stuff. So it's kind of been tarred as an IoT tool, and it's, as you've seen, I haven't actually shown any IoT yet. All of the stuff is to do with data integration, API integration, user interface generations, all kinds of stuff. Now I'll show you IoT, having hopefully convinced you that it's not just an IoT tool. So let's have a quick look here. You'll see on the left-hand side there are MQTT in and MQTT out. These MQTT, again, is another IBM thing that became MQTT.org. It became an open source tool, so it is now an OASIS standard. That means it's free and wild, and it's managed externally to IBM. So anybody can use it, and you'll find it available on pretty much everything. Every platform that is IoT will support MQTT. Some things that support messaging also have an MQTT protocols adapter for them. So most RabbitMQ or AMQP type services have an MQTT adapter built into them. So there's a couple of ways you can do IoT kind of out the box with NodeRED. One is you just drop in MQTT. I might create a new flow because this is different from the other stuff, just purely in the semantics of what's going on. So you have MQTT. This is a subscriber. So you'll get events come in. So we'll create a new MQTT broker. Don't have one handy, so it's going to ask me for one. If you don't have one, you can get one from It's iot.eclipse.org. Also, another open source platform. So you'll find that there's a whole load of stuff here for doing IoT. There's a broker available online. I go to MQTT. This should tell us how to set one up. There we go. MQTT eclipse.org port 1883. So we're in here. MQTT.eclipse.org. We don't have anything that we need to worry about here. Security, we don't need a username and password because it's an open platform. We're done. We need to have a topic, and that's what you subscribe to with IoT events. So since I don't know where they are, I will just put in anything, just see what data comes out of it. The hash says just show me everything. And then we can work out one that we want to process. We drop in a debug node again, because this is new to us. We have no idea what the data is going to look like until we turn it on. So if I deploy this now, we'll get lots of stuff firing in. We'll turn it off again. And hopefully once it's caught up, we'll be able to see some of the kinds of topics that are in there. There we go. So they have a topic hierarchy. So this one, somebody's just publishing some data out there. You get the topic, you get payload, devices come up. This one, things have died, whatever that might be. So you can subscribe to events, you get payload. This payload, you won't know what it is until you've seen them. Of course, you can, of course, create your own as well. In which case, we can do our, let's create one here. And here we've got a topic. And this topic is the topic that we can publish on. This node that knows kind of about these kinds of things. So let's create a JSON object. We'll give it a message. Joy to the world. There's our payload. We're going to publish it on a topic, which will be, let's go RDC demo. This is arbitrary. Message. That's my topic. I hook it up until I want to use MQTT eclipse.org. Now, you see there's a topic field there. If I look at the documentation, the inputs here are the payload, but also I can override the topic by setting what that topic is just in the inject node, which is what I've done. So I don't need to set topic here. I can pass the topic through dynamically. And now I'll publish there. Now, what I can do is say, let's look for any topics that begin with my initials. I'll set this to fire off every, let's do the whole lot, between, where are we, 2 in the afternoon and 6 in the evening, every day. We'll fire them off every 1 minute. Yeah, so once a minute, it's going to send a message. We'll deploy and then debug land, hopefully. I'll just kick one off to start it. Oh, of course it doesn't work. Oh, why? So retain false. Message.topic is there. And deploy. Why is it not coming back again? Auto detect, no. That should be coming through. Let's just try doing a message where I set the topic. RDC demo message. I can get rid of that one. I go back to get them all. Oh, that's why. I've got the messages turned off. Yep. I'll put my wildcard back in there. I'll turn debug back on. Deploy it. Clear the bug. Now, hopefully, if I publish, here's my message. It was coming through all the time. I just had it turned off. So there's IoT. I'm publishing events and consuming them. Anybody could be a subscriber to these topics. You can make it as complicated or as easy as you like. There is also the IBM IoT platform, which I'll show you is a different component, and it's still around. It was supposed to have been turned off a little while ago, but there's a thing called Quick Start, which is designed to get you going quickly with IoT devices and platforms, where you can publish events, consume events with applications, and it will kind of store the messages for you for a while. And you can then, once you've got your own instance, you can then create historians and capture data regardless of whether you've got an application consuming them all. So this thing uses an IoT app component, which we've now added into our application again. And if I clear that out and go down here, I'll show you something that I hope you'll find is a little bit cool. I can find IoT app in. So IoT app in defaults to this quick start thing, which I'll show you in a second. You're looking for any device event. It needs a device ID, so you have to be very specific about which device you want. And if you go to a website called quickstart.internetofthings.ibmcloud.com/IoT sensor, you get a little web emulator, which gives you 3 attributes which you can control. You can have an interactive control over 3 different attributes, different values, and there will be a link up here. This is the device ID, which is generated on the fly, so you can't tell it what the device ID is you want it to have, but you can put it in here. Drop in your debug node to this one because we're now interested in this one. Turn on all the message so we can see everything that's coming through. Deploy that. Now you'll see the data that's coming through has, I'll turn that debug off, stop it moving. We've got the device ID. We've got this dynamic sensor, IoT quick start sensor. It's got an IoT sensor event. The data format is JSON. It's got a D that says it's coming from a device. And it's got these 3 temperature values, 3 attributes: temperature, humidity, and object temperature. And as I interact with the sensor online, I could be changing these values. So I'll put humidity up to 90. So if you wanted to create a tool that would work when you eventually attached a real sensor like a DHT11 or DH22 sensor, but you didn't have the ability to generate extreme conditions like extreme humidity or extreme temperature without having to faff around with hair dryers and so on. You could use a sensor emulator like this to drive the same kind of conditions, so you could work out what you would do when the real world starts responding bizarrely. And you can generate the data into your application here. So if I turn that back on, I should then start getting sensor data with the updated values, and you'll see I should have high humidity values up here in the 90s. So that gives me dynamic control at the sub-second level. I could be generating events into an application. I can do the same thing, of course, by saying that this application is also generating IoT events. So in the same way that we can publish with MQTT, we can publish here. Set my own device ID. I can publish into Quick Start. I can create an event type that I want. I can put the data in that I need. You can also then use an API key, and that relates then to your own IoT instance, which you can create from the catalog in the cloud. You go to IBM Cloud, look for IoT. Hopefully we've got IoT, and you'll see there's an Internet of Things platform. That lets you create them, and there's a free one that doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't have a huge amount of data. You can have 500 devices, 200 meg of data in a month. I've already got one, which is why I get that warning notification. So you can create publish and subscribe models, which is great if you want to try and get around firewall mechanisms that prevent you from sending data into an environment. You can have the data, the commands that you want published out to an IoT platform, and then have your dependent devices subscribe to those events and pull them in. So you don't have to have a direct one-to-one connection. So great as a tool for using with IoT, but essentially not limited to that at all. But you see, once the data's come in, it's just data. It's just IoT JSON data, and you can make logical decisions on it, and store it, retrieve it, update user interfaces, whatever it is you need to do. So, I'm sorry, I overran a little bit on the half past. Anyone still there? Anyone got any questions? Where are we? Every time I do this, I turn my video off. Who's still there, and is there anyone with a question? Joshua.
I'm just trying to think if I have any.
Is there anything I haven't covered that you thought, oh, you didn't cover that?
Audio?
Audio. So I was trying to get the audio stuff that I was showing you is actually working. It's just that the microphone feed is coming in, but what is happening is it's being sent to what I think is an out-of-date speech-to-text service that I'm using. So you could use this microphone, which uses Get User Media. You can also put in a browser, just have it embedded in your browser, use Get User Media to open up microphone, and then you can capture audio and send it over as a buffer. So if we look at this, I'll turn on the debug again, turn those away, clear out the debug. So if I turn on the microphone and let it record, then when I stop, it releases the buffer. What goes into, what should have gone into the message is a big buffer.
Yeah.
But I'm getting swamped with this error about the speech to text not being right. And I think that's to do with the version of speech to text that I'm running, because that should normally go straight through.
Yeah.
So that's speech processing. If you want to do audio processing, which is different, I'm assuming you mean, I'm assuming speech, but do you mean general?
And what I've been working on is mainly just looking at the various modules that interact with audio, just to learn the data formats.
Yeah.
It either seems to be either one big buffer or a stream of smaller buffers.
Yeah. So the one that I was using in the browser version, in this one, If I show you the code, well, if you can see it because of the background. Yeah, that doesn't make it any more readable, does it? This is using the get user media, which uses the browser microphone capability, captures the audio stream, and then sends it directly to the Watson speech to text. So it's actually taking Watson speech to text as the audio function, takes the microphone, hooks up a WebSocket, and then just streams the audio into Watson speech to text, gets the transcription back out, and then uses it to drive my text-based user interface, my chatbot interface. And you can get all of that from the Watson, I think it's the Watson Speech SDK samples. Yeah, Speech SDK. So if you go there, you'll find this repo, which tells you all about using the speech mechanism. Effectively, what I've done is take one of the examples. There's a static page, and I've taken the microphone streaming object to console HTML, which is going to pull in that Watson speech to text microphone stuff, and that is effectively doing get user media, get permission to use the microphone within that browser session, and then it just streams it across. So you have to provide this with your Watson speech to text API token to get it to work. So it's in an environment variable that you set up before you launch the page, and then it just streams the stuff off, and it works really, really simply. It's unbelievably straightforward to get it to work. So NodeRED itself is not the best tool for launching the audio. You need a browser component or another socket based that can talk. So what often you'll find is that there's a NodeRED link, and of course NodeRED. So the microphones that you get in laptops or Raspberry Pis and stuff are not the best ways of capturing audio. Things like Alexa are fantastic. So what you can use is an Alexa or an Echo as your audio capture, and then you can put in a skill on the back end that just says, once you've done the nice audio capture and clean up, send the audio stream to you can either send the transcription or the audio stream to NodeRED, and then have it to the Watson speech to text conversion, because it has a discriminated and cleaned up audio stream
and voice activity, I'm guessing, just to tidy up.
So it works really well, and it's happened so often that there are loads of samples here for how do you make Alexa work with NodeRED. People like the way that NodeRED gave them the ability to craft the skill visually, which the Alexa skill builder doesn't. And some of the Watson speech to text capabilities in the metadata it generates were richer than Alexa. I don't know whether it's quite still the case, but Alexa just missed out some things that you could get from Watson. So you could pass the audio stream across as well. So that's quite a common implementation, is you use some kind of voice capture device, an audio device, to capture it first and then send the audio stream or the audio buffer to the Watson speech to text. And then NodeRED just gets the transcription and it treats it as if it came from text input. Does that answer your question? Yep. Who else have we got? Anyone else got any questions? Magic trick to show NodeRED pick up tweet. Thank you, John, for what should be a nice and easy thing to do. Let's see. In my, where is my Pi? I used to have or Twitter capture. The problem with Twitter was we used to have a node. There's Twilio. I wonder if I can find Twitter. There's one. So here I have a Twitter listener that uses my Twitter ID and it's looking for information from Southwest Trains, Southwest Rail. So that when they tweet out things like, "Our trains are running late," we'll let you know, and then you can do something about it. So things like, "Don't bother going to the train station now because that train's cancelled," that kind of thing. This works only because I went through the extra process you have to go through nowadays to authorize yourself as a Twitter API developer. It used to be you just put in the Twitter node and it would then do an automatic OAuth registration with Twitter and say this application was authorized as a Twitter app, and off you went. That was obviously abused in some way, and they've now made it so that you have to register as a developer on Twitter. Where's the information, for example? So if we pull this up, you will find full tweet object information. Here's the documentation for this, and you've got to go to the developer side to get it. I think in here, if you create a new one, there you go. Create your own application. So not only have you to create your application here to do this, you have to go to Twitter, sign up as a Twitter developer, register an application, and then gives you your API key and your API secret, and an access token and secret for this particular application instance. And the form for signing up as a developer means you've got to fill in, I think it's 300 words about what kind of application you will develop and what needs to happen. So here's the stuff here. It used to be really easy, but they made it a little more complicated. However, you go through the pain, and it takes maybe 20 minutes or so to fill in the forms and exchange stuff with Twitter. They tend not to reject people who just want to do some development work. What you do then is you put in your credentials here. So instead of it just being your logging into Twitter on your browser and then just have it do an OAuth share, you have to get these 4 keys, put them in. Once you've done it, you're up and running. You can then say, I would like to show, get tweets. So I can just say, turn all these off. This will immediately overrun my limit, but I'll show you in action. If I take that, go to debug, clear it out, redeploy, and hopefully turn on debug before it breaks. It should kick in, and I'll get some tweets. I think I've got it set to, is it everybody? All public tweets. So it shouldn't be doing it for Southwest Train. So there's a little bit of a lag with it when it talks to the data sampling API. But yeah, you'll get tweets out of it, and you'll get lots of information about each tweet. Who sent it, how many followers they have, what country they're in, what they think might be their marital status, how many tweets they've made in the past, all kinds of stuff. Not sure this has picked up the new terms, so let's do tweet to specific users. John, would you be willing to tweet? And if so, what's your Twitter handle? Because then we can see it work.
We'd love to tweet. We'd be honoured.
And you are at Johnny Mac, right?
I am J0 and then YMAC.
Like that.
That's the one. And what would you like me to tweet, sir?
Oh, anything. Don't tell me what you're going to tweet, because we should see it. We tweet it. I'll say there is a lag and there's no guarantee that you get every tweet, but with a bit of luck, it should work.
Okay, it is on its way. Do we tweet to you, Ross, or just into the sphere, just out?
Just
into...
yeah.
Okay.
It might come to. As I say, I haven't done this for quite some time because it was so painful to show people how it worked that they could never really get it done in a workshop. So we had to kind of turn it off.
Sorry, Ross. My apologies.
But thanks for setting me up. That was good. Yeah, try tweeting at our crooks. See if that works. Gosh, I haven't changed anything, but it should come through. So there used to be two. Oh, look at that. Okay.
Legendary. Perfect.
So, much like when you get an HTTP request comes in, you see all the baggage that comes with an inbound HTTP request with all the middleware layer. Twitter gives you all of this. So here's your text of your message. Thank you, John. Where it looks, how to put it in, what entities are in it, if there are any. It came from your mobile app.
It did.
Who sent it? So John McNamara, we think you're in Winchester.
Yep.
Your profile short bit. What else have we got here? This is to you. Is your things that you've got in your profile that say about me. So all this stuff, here's your friends count, your follower count, your list. So all this stuff comes in. So you can do a whole load of stuff about influencer graphs. If you're following the right kind of things, who's my most influential follower of the people that are tweeting? Which ones are worth me retweeting? Which ones are depending on how you want to manipulate the system. Loads of stuff here. Doesn't know about your geo for whatever reason, so it's not picking up that information. But if it can, you'll get that. It just thinks you're in Winchester, but it doesn't have the geo tag for that. All right, so that happens every time you get just the tweet text. You'll get all this extra stuff as well to help you. But you're not guaranteed to get it for every tweet. It is to some extent sampling, and based on when the connection goes in, there is also a rate limit. So how many messages it'll take at a time. But yeah, you can do it. So there is a Twitter node. Where are we? There. In the kind of social media type inputs. You can also do stuff with Stomp if you wanted to hook up to Stomp. There's a feed parser which you can use for RSS. So if you got that thing I'm doing with the BBC, you register. I register the BBC as a feed filter, and it sends me just news articles that I want in finance and whatever. So it's great. And you can also, once you've registered and your apps are a valid app, you can, of course, tweet out. And you then have the joy of drawing the attention of Andy Stanford Clark when your IoT devices cause tweets, and you forget how fast it goes, and you end up tweeting like 20 times a second with a timer changing the message, because as long as it's different, it'll keep tweeting them. So yeah, you can tweet from in here as well once you've got your developer keys. So as I say, it's a little bit more of a faff, but yeah, you can use it to hook into social media. You can hook into Facebook. There are Facebook integrations. Let's say we were to go to NodeRED. Go back here, look for Facebook. You'll find those Facebook Messenger integrations. There you go. There's flows to show you how you hook them up. All of these things, of course, need you to grant particularly high privileges to the applications to be able to interact on your behalf with Facebook, or Instagram or Pinterest or whatever else it is you want to do. I'm not even, don't know if anyone's done TikTok. Let's see if there's a TikTok. No, there you go. So if someone has a desire to do something with TikTok in the time remaining that TikTok is still going to be accessible, you could use that and create a NodeRED one and add it in as long as there's an API and so on. Basically, if there's an API endpoint and you can pass credentials and secure all that, then you can do it with NodeRED, or someone's already done it. So thank you for that, John. That was good. What else have we got?
You're welcome, Ross.
I'm confused as to why my speech to text doesn't work, because the mechanism that I'm using on my browser transcription one is using the same service to do the microphone capture. It's doing it as a streaming conversion. So I'm wondering whether I need to give like Soheil a nudge and say, we need a Watson refresh. The stuff that's coming back here, this again is just converting data on the fly in my application. The flows that are generated use these template nodes, and template nodes are just a wonderful thing. A template node here, for me to get all the values, say for active customers, just uses mustache templates. So it's not code. You can't put code in mustache templates. You just say, I want to navigate through an array or singleton and throw out some HTML on the fly. So this generates me a list of customers, and then down here it'll also create some stuff using NATO names for them, so you don't have to read out numbers. It can just use a name instead. And that's a really simple template, and you can repeat stuff. And it knows this is HTML, so it'll fill the rest of it out as a page if you need it to. So templates are a joy. The help for templates is down here. There'll be a link out to Mustache, and it tells you just how to take data arrays and generate lots of stuff. And the other one I mentioned on the passing is JSON Alta. This is a fantastic tool for doing sort of declarative array processing. It's like functional programming without having to write function nodes in NodeRED. As long as you can express it as a reformatting or a mapping or a filtering of data as you're flowing it through, you can do it in line with JSON Alta. It's a fabulous extension that's been incorporated into NodeRED over the last year or so. Makes things really fast and robust because it's not relying on you doing coding. As you thought, there's the joy that I have with NodeRED is I can hook it up to, say, that MQTT feed. I had no idea what the data will look like that comes out of that MQTT subscription, but I can turn it on and then see it. It doesn't break. I don't have to do anything with it other than realize what it now looks like, and now I can go and do some processing on it. And then I can just do kind of stepwise refinement, if you like, within the application. I've got the data, I've captured it. Now I can do some manipulation, formatting, interpretation, then take some action, and then generate some kind of result. All by doing stepwise, and it very, very seldom falls over. It's usually because you've run out of memory. If you're holding too much data in memory, it'll break stuff. Turn off the video again. So coming up on 4, anywhere around that wants to do anywhere? Who do we have left? Natalia, Sky, Joshua. I think we're down to a small group. Thank you guys all for sticking with it. Is there anything else that you wanted to hear and didn't see?
Ross, I've just seen one in the chat feed about integration with YouTube, but I've not seen that. Have you seen that?
No, there's no integration with YouTube other than through the standard APIs. Let's have a look. YouTube. There's no reason why you couldn't. So there's a casting one. Google Cast, Chromecast, YouTube search widget you could go into. So here, there's a YouTube search. So if you wanted to get back the URLs for YouTube's, and then there's the YouTube data API. So I'm not sure, it wouldn't be a way for you to generate videos, but if you wanted to, so what used to happen, there used to be some samples that we would have, which was NodeRED hooked into YouTube, pulling down the YouTube videos, running FFmpeg, extracting the audio stream, pumping it through speech to text and generating closed captioning on the fly, and adding some frames around the side of the video, which were the kind of metadata. All right, so these are the topics that are being talked about at this point in the video, and then you could add in these stuff. There was a problem with copyright, so we had to turn that bit off. But since you would have to use your YouTube credentials to make this bit work, as your Google credentials, so it would be your credentials, not just public use. Then Google would be happier because they know they do know who was infringing copyright rather than it just being done a lot. So you can do it, yeah.
I guess that there'll be an interesting use case for, when you see like really long videos and in there somewhere's the answer to your question that you've got about aliens or whatever else you're thinking about. You can say, ask the question for Watson chatbot and then go to the point in the video where they actually talk about or answer that question, which would be a pretty cool way of indexing and the videos.
Yeah. So as I said, we used to do it. We have some samples that do it for TED Talks.
Yeah.
I don't think those are NodeRED based, but the mechanism's there for using Watson speech to text. And all you really need to be doing is keeping a time key, so you know where in the video the audio is tracking. And you can always go back and then re-index it. All you have to do is put in the start point into the YouTube video, and you're back where you want to be. Yeah. So certainly has been done, and that's I think where these residuals. This one's 4 years old for this particular node. You can always go and have a look and see what it does, right? So it's going to do a download. It's going to capture it. It'll use your credentials. It'll do a stream capture, load it down. So some of these things might not work well on the cloud natively because it's going to try and store them in the local file system. But if you convert them into cloud-based ones, you can feed them up into like an S3 type store. Then you've got your own copy of the video object. And then you can add in extra bits as you want with keyframes. So Sean Tracy has done some stuff around keyframe analysis on audio, on video. So you could save keyframes, which would be your kind of time sequence that you could link against and say, well, this audio matched to this keyframe, and that keyframe starts at this point in the video. So you're not trying to track it exactly to the second, but you might say it's in this sequence. So go to that sequence. It keeps the amount of data you need to capture down a bit. Good question. I like that. What else I got? Automate their coffee maker with this. Yes. People automate all kinds of stuff with NodeRED. Although I tried to stress really hard that it's not inherently an IoT tool. Lots of people do use it for doing IoT automation or IoT based automation. So if you've got a device that can subscribe to an IoT feed with MQTT or generate their status with MQTT, piece of cake. If not, then you need a little kind of proxy device that can do it for you, and you can do it with something like an ESP. 266 or Feather or one of those little Memo boards that have enough MQTT on them to listen for commands off, say, MQTT eclipse.org, for example, and use that to trigger a relay. So yeah, it's very straightforward to automate turning the coffee maker on, using a thermal sensor to know when the steam starts coming out the top, or just monitor when the self-canceling button kicks in the kettle, and then tell people, "Oh, sorry, your kettle's boiled. Now come and get your coffee." Or if it's a percolator, when the percolation's finished, or there's all kinds of things. But using IoT events is a great mechanism for abstracting away from the physical wiring to make that all happen. All right.
Ideal, Ross. I'm about to pop in a video of exactly that project where some guys from Imperial took it along a coffee machine. And there's no truth to it that we couldn't figure out how to work it, so we needed to apply AI to give us coffee. Visual recognition, speech to text, text to speech. So when it saw you, it went, "Oh, you had an espresso last time," and they would give you the espresso. Yeah. Or you could give it requests, and it would give you what you wanted. Then it got all giddy and weird, and we had musical requests where it played songs, and then gave us news updates, and pretty much became self-aware. But I will find the video. I will post it. In fact, I might have it here if I'm. I got it here. I'll find the video and post it on to you.
I'll just put it in the chat.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you've just put the video in the chat.
Oh,
yeah.
Amazing.
I had it.
Oh, great. Super. Yeah, oh, that's super. Guys, anyone got anything else for Ross? Any really hard questions that we can throw at?
Yeah, throw me hard questions. Oh, sorry, I just dropped something off the desk. Yeah.
So, if you've run out, I can have all the easy ones.
Yeah.
So, Ross, if there's nothing else, Ross, say thank you so very much for this. It's hugely appreciated. I know there's something that a lot of people wanted from UCL, Lancaster, Sheffield, a number of universities. Birmingham City are on here as well with Dell. So I say thank you so much, Ross. Great work, and this is, I think, one of the best tutorials I think I've ever come across with NodeRED. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Fine, if it's been useful, that'd be great, one way or the other. But let me know if there's any questions come up from anybody that's been on it, or anyone that's on any replays. Just get in touch with me, and I will try and help. And if I can't, I'll go to people who know better.
Oh, I will. Thank you so much, Ross. But amazing. So yeah, in that case, Ross, thank you so much. Thank you for turning up and posing so many hard questions, folks. It's really kind of you. And as Ross has any questions, ping them to me. And if I can't answer them, which will probably be quite likely, I will send them off to Ross.
Right.
With that, I'm going to stop the recording now. 2.5 hours, Ross. Fair play, buddy.
Oh, that's great.